In the bustling city of Port Harcourt lived a young woman named Grace. Her beauty was legendary, skin smooth as river stones, eyes that sparkled like stars reflected in water, and a smile that could make even the sternest market woman pause mid-haggle. Grace wasn't just beautiful, she was captivating in a way that made people forget their own names when she walked by. But Grace's beauty was matched only by her poverty. She lived with her mother, Mama Grace, in a small room behind the old mechanic's workshop. The zinc roof leaked when it rained, and the walls were thin enough that they could hear their neighbors' conversations word for word. While other girls her age wore the latest Ankara prints and carried designer handbags from Dubai, Grace wore the same 3 dresses, rotated carefully to make them last. Grace's father, Mr. Okoro, was a security guard at one of the multinational oil companies. Her mother sold vegetables at Mile 1 Market, waking before dawn to arrange tomatoes, peppers, and onions in neat pyramids that caught the early shoppers' attention. They weren't poor, but they weren't rich either. Grace watched her classmates at the University of Port Harcourt arrive in their father's SUVs while she took the packed buses that wheezed and groaned through the city's traffic. Every evening, as Grace walked home from lectures, she passed through GRA Phase 2, where the wealthy lived behind high walls topped with electric wire. Through iron gates, she glimpsed manicured lawns, gleaming cars, and young women her age stepping out in clothes that cost more than her father's monthly salary. The sight filled her with a longing so sharp it felt like hunger. One day, she whispered to herself, watching a girl not much older than herself emerge from a white Mercedes, dripping in gold jewelry, "One day, I'll live like that." Grace's best friend, Blessing, often joined her on these evening walks. Blessing was practical, content with her simple life, but she understood Grace's dreams even if she didn't share them. "Grace, you know contentment is the greatest wealth," Blessing would say gently as they watched the rich girls through the gates. But Grace's heart burned with ambition that felt bigger than contentment could contain. The turning point came during her first year at university. Grace's father fell ill with a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. The medical bills drained the family's small savings like water through a broken pot. Her mother's vegetable business couldn't cover both the hospital costs and Grace's school fees. The university gave her a deadline: pay or forfeit her education. Grace sat on her bed that night, staring at the admission letter that had once filled her with such hope. Her dreams of becoming an engineer seemed to crumble like poorly mixed concrete. She thought of her father lying in the hospital, of her mother's tired eyes, of the classmates who would graduate while she returned to the market to sell vegetables. That's when her phone buzzed with a message from her cousin, Joy, who lived in Abuja. "Grace, I have an opportunity for you. Something that could change your life completely. The pay is more than you can imagine. Are you interested?" Grace's fingers trembled as she typed back, "Tell me more." Joy called immediately, her voice bright with excitement. "There's this woman, Mrs. Victoria. She's incredibly wealthy, owns several businesses. She's looking for someone young, beautiful, and discreet for a very special job. The pay is 2 million naira per month." Grace's breath caught. 2 million naira was more than her parents made in a year. "What kind of job?" Joy's voice dropped slightly. "It's unusual. But Grace, with that money, you could pay your father's medical bills, finish your education, and set your family up for life. She's very selective about who she chooses." "What exactly would I be doing?" There was a pause. "She breeds exotic animals. Very rare, very expensive ones. She needs someone to take care of them, feed them, groom them, make sure they're comfortable. The animals are very special to her, and she pays well for their care." Grace felt a flutter of unease, but the thought of 2 million naira drowned out her caution. "When can I meet her?" 3 days later, Grace found herself on a night bus to Abuja, her heart pounding with anticipation and nervousness. Joy met her at the bus park the next morning, looking more glamorous than Grace had ever seen her. Her cousin wore designer clothes and carried a handbag that probably cost more than Grace's entire wardrobe. "You look good," Joy said, embracing her. "Mrs. Victoria is going to love you." They drove through Abuja's wide streets, past the impressive government buildings and up into Asokoro, where the most powerful people in Nigeria lived. The house they stopped at was a mansion that seemed to stretch endlessly, with marble columns and fountains that sparkled in the afternoon sun. Mrs. Victoria was a woman in her 50s, elegantly dressed with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through Grace. She was polite but distant, studying Grace as if she were evaluating a piece of artwork. "Joy tells me you're interested in working with my animals," Mrs. Victoria said, her voice cultured and precise. "Yes, Ma," Grace replied, suddenly feeling very young and out of place in the opulent sitting room. "These aren't ordinary pets, my dear. They're very special, very valuable. The work requires complete discretion and absolute obedience. Can you handle that?" Grace nodded, though something in the woman's tone made her stomach flutter with apprehension. Mrs. Victoria led her to the back of the property, where several large buildings stood among perfectly manicured gardens. "This is where my animals are housed," she explained, unlocking a heavy door. Inside, Grace saw something that made her step back in shock. The building was filled with large, spacious cages, and in them were the biggest cats she had ever seen. Not house cats, but lions and leopards, their powerful bodies moving with deadly grace behind reinforced bars. "These are my babies," Mrs. Victoria said, her voice softening as she gazed at the magnificent creatures. "They require very special care, very specific attention. The person who works with them must be fearless, dedicated, and willing to do whatever is necessary for their comfort and happiness." Grace's mouth went dry. "What exactly would I need to do?" Mrs. Victoria turned to her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Nothing harmful, my dear. Simply provide them with companionship, comfort, and intimacy. These animals have very specific needs, and I pay very well for someone who can meet those needs completely." The meaning behind her words hit Grace like a physical blow. She felt the room spinning around her as the horrible reality became clear. I need to think about this," Grace stammered. Mrs. Victoria's smile remained fixed. "Of course, my dear. But remember, this opportunity won't wait long. And the money, well, 2 million naira can solve many problems, can't it?" That night, alone in the guest room Joy had arranged for her, Grace lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from her mother. The last message was urgent. "Grace, your father had another episode. The doctors say he needs immediate surgery, but we don't have the money. Please, if there's any way." Grace closed her eyes, feeling as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff. On one side was everything she had been raised to believe was right and decent. On the other was a solution to all her family's problems, a way to save her father's life and secure her own future. By morning, she had made her decision. The next few months passed in a haze of horror and riches. Mrs. Victoria kept her word about the money. Every month, 2 million naira appeared in Grace's account. She sent most of it home, telling her family she had found work as a personal assistant to a wealthy businesswoman. Her father's surgery was successful, her school fees were paid, and her mother stopped looking so tired and worried. Grace bought herself beautiful clothes, expensive jewelry, and rented a luxury apartment in Abuja's most exclusive area. From the outside, her life looked perfect. She was young, beautiful, wealthy, and successful. But inside, she felt as if something essential had died. She avoided mirrors when possible, unable to bear seeing her own eyes. She took long, hot showers every day, but never felt clean. The money that had once seemed like salvation now felt like chains binding her to a life that disgusted her. The animals themselves were not cruel to her. They were simply following their nature, unaware that what they did was destroying her soul piece by piece. Mrs. Victoria was always pleased with Grace's work, often commenting on how well suited she was for the job. "You have a natural gift, my dear," she would say, counting out the monthly payment. The animals respond so well to you. Grace learned to smile and nod, to play the part of the grateful employee. But at night, alone in her expensive apartment, she would curl up in bed and cry until her throat was raw. She began experiencing health problems after 6 months. Severe abdominal pain, irregular bleeding, and a persistent infection that wouldn't heal despite multiple treatments. The private doctor Mrs. Victoria sent her to was discreet but concerned. "Miss Grace, you need to stop whatever activities are causing this trauma," he said gently during one examination. "Your body is trying to tell you something." But Grace couldn't stop. The money had become a drug, and her family now depended on it. Her father was walking again, her mother had expanded her business, and Grace was funding the education of 3 younger cousins. How could she explain that the money would stop? How could she tell them where it really came from? The end came suddenly and brutally. During what Mrs. Victoria called a special session with one of the larger lions, something went wrong. The animal, perhaps startled or confused, became aggressive. Grace barely escaped with her life, but the damage was severe. In the hospital, the surgeon delivered the news with professional compassion. "Miss Grace, I'm sorry, but we had to remove your uterus. The damage was too extensive to repair. You'll recover, but you'll never be able to have children." Grace stared at the white hospital ceiling, feeling utterly hollow. At 21 years old, she had lost the ability to become a mother. The dreams she'd once had of holding her own babies, of building a family, were gone forever. Mrs. Victoria visited once, bringing flowers and an envelope of money. "I'm sorry about the accident, my dear," she said, her voice carrying what might have been genuine regret. "These things happen sometimes. The doctor assures me you'll make a full recovery." "I can't have children," Grace said flatly. Mrs. Victoria's face remained impassive. "That's unfortunate, but you're young. There are many ways to find fulfillment in life besides motherhood." After Mrs. Victoria left, Grace threw the money across the room. The bills scattered like autumn leaves, meaningless green paper that had cost her everything that mattered. When she was released from the hospital, Grace couldn't bear to return to Abuja. She went home to Port Harcourt, telling her family she was taking a break from work to recover from an accident. They welcomed her with open arms, grateful for all she had done for them, unaware of the price she had paid. Grace tried to return to her old life, to finish her engineering degree and pretend the previous year had never happened. But she had changed in ways that went deeper than physical scars. She was withdrawn, jumping at loud noises, unable to form close relationships with her classmates. It was Blessing who finally confronted her one evening as they sat by the river that wound through their neighborhood. "Grace, what happened to you in Abuja?" Blessing asked gently. "You're not the same person who left here." For a long moment, Grace said nothing, watching the muddy water flow past them toward the Atlantic. Then, slowly, the whole story came tumbling out. The poverty, the desperation, Mrs. Victoria's offer, the months of horror, and finally the accident that had left her barren. Blessing listened in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face. When Grace finished, they sat together in the growing darkness, the weight of the terrible secret hanging between them. "Grace," Blessing whispered finally, "I'm so sorry. I wish you had talked to me before you left." "What could you have done?" Grace asked bitterly. "Could you have paid for my father's surgery? Could you have given me 2 million naira a month?" "No," Blessing admitted. "But maybe we could have found another way. Maybe your father would have understood if you had to drop out of school to work. Maybe the family could have managed somehow." Grace laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Maybe. But I didn't want to just manage, Blessing. I wanted more. I wanted to be like those girls we used to watch through the gates. And look what it cost me." The months that followed were the darkest of Grace's life. She completed her degree mechanically, her grades suffering as she struggled with depression and trauma. The money she had saved began to dwindle as she sought therapy and medical treatment for her ongoing health issues. Her family began to worry about her obvious distress, asking gentle questions about when she might return to her high-paying job in Abuja. Grace invented excuse after excuse, claiming the company was restructuring, that her boss was traveling, that the position was temporary. The lies felt like acid in her mouth, adding to her burden of shame. It was during her final year of university that Grace met David. He was a medical student, kind and gentle, with eyes that seemed to see the good in everyone. They met in the library, where Grace spent most of her time hiding from the world behind stacks of engineering textbooks. David was persistent in his quiet way, gradually drawing Grace into conversations about their studies, about books, about dreams for the future. He seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions, not just her appearance or the expensive clothes she still wore from her Abuja days. Slowly, carefully, Grace began to open her heart to the possibility of happiness again. David made her laugh for the first time in months. He brought her small gifts, not expensive jewelry or designer clothes, but thoughtful things: a book by her favorite author, a flower he'd picked on his way to meet her, a playlist of songs that reminded him of her. For several months, Grace allowed herself to believe that maybe she could have a normal life after all. Maybe she could love and be loved without having to reveal the terrible secrets of her past. David spoke often of his dreams of starting a family someday, of having children who would grow up with both parents to love and guide them. Each time he mentioned children, Grace's heart broke a little more. Their relationship deepened, and David began talking about marriage. He was finishing his medical residency and had been offered a position at a hospital in Calabar. He wanted Grace to come with him as his wife, to start their new life together in the beautiful coastal city. One evening, as they walked along the beach in Port Harcourt, David stopped suddenly and dropped to one knee. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples as he pulled out a simple but beautiful ring. "Grace," he said, his voice shaking with emotion, "you're the most amazing woman I've ever met. You're intelligent, beautiful, and you have a heart bigger than the ocean. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me?" Grace stared at the ring, her heart pounding. This was everything she had once dreamed of: a good man who loved her, the promise of a happy marriage, a chance at redemption. But the weight of her secrets felt heavier than ever. "Yes," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, David, I'll marry you." They were married 6 months later in a beautiful ceremony at Grace's family church. David's family welcomed her warmly, and her own family wept with joy to see their daughter so happy after the difficult period she'd gone through. For the first year of their marriage, Grace was happier than she had been since childhood. David was a wonderful husband, gentle and caring. They lived in a modest but comfortable home in Calabar, where David worked at the teaching hospital and Grace found a job with a local engineering firm. But as time passed, the question that Grace dreaded began to surface more frequently. David's mother asked when they would start having children. His sisters spoke enviously of Grace's freedom to pursue her career, joking that she should enjoy it while she could before the babies started coming. David himself became more vocal about his desire to start a family. "I know we said we'd wait a few years," he told Grace one evening as they prepared for bed, "but I see the children at the hospital every day, and I can't help but imagine our own little ones. Maybe we could start trying sooner than planned." Grace's stomach clenched with familiar panic. "Let's wait a little longer," she said, forcing a smile. "I want to get more established in my career first." David was understanding, but Grace could see the slight disappointment in his eyes. As months turned into another year, his patience began to wear thin. Not in a cruel way, David was incapable of cruelty, but in the way of a man whose deepest dreams were being delayed without explanation. The breaking point came during a family gathering at David's parents' house. His youngest sister had just announced her pregnancy, and the celebration was full of joy and excitement. David's mother pulled Grace aside in the kitchen. "My dear," she said kindly, "is everything all right? You and David have been married for 2 years now. In our family, children usually come quickly after marriage. Perhaps you should see a doctor." Grace felt the walls closing in around her. taking our time, Mama." David's mother studied her with concerned eyes. "Grace, you know I love you like my own daughter. But David wants children so badly. I see how he looks at his sister's baby, how he lights up around children at church. Don't wait too long, my dear. A man needs to see his legacy in little faces that look like his own." That night, Grace lay awake beside her sleeping husband, knowing she couldn't continue the deception much longer. David deserved the truth, but she was terrified of losing him. How could she explain that she had traded away her ability to give him the children he dreamed of for money? How could she tell him about the horrific months in Abuja that had stolen her womb and left her barren? The decision was made for her when David suggested they see a fertility specialist together. "Just to make sure everything is working properly," he said with his characteristic optimism. "Maybe there's something simple we can address." Grace knew she had reached the end of her ability to hide. The night before their appointment with the doctor, she finally found the courage to tell David the truth. They sat on their small veranda, looking out at the lights of Calabar twinkling in the distance. Grace had rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in her mind, but now that the moment had come, the words felt impossible to speak. "David," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's something I need to tell you. Something about my past that I should have shared before we married." David turned to her with concern. "What is it, my love? You know you can tell me anything." And so Grace told him everything. About her family's poverty, her father's illness, the impossible choice she had faced. About Joy's offer, Mrs. Victoria's mansion, and the horrific months that followed. About the money that had seemed like salvation but had cost her everything that mattered. Watch out for part 2.